excited to be here again, and even more excited that I'm with Beverly Glazier, who's our every Tuesday individual that comes on and has so much value. The more you get to know Beverly, the more you get to appreciate and respect what Beverly does and how well she does it. With that said, I also want to introduce Lance Slatton, and I got to know Lance through Beverly, had a great Zoom call. Me and Lance share Michigan residents, at least previously. Got to talk about areas that most people wouldn't be able to talk about if you hadn't lived it. And chat's wide open. We depend on chat to be as relevant as possible, create as many valuable takeaways to justify everybody's time, effort, and resources today. And with that, I'll swing it. Oh, and by the way, today's word of the day is caregiving, which Lance is really at the top of the game in caregiving. So listen closely. Hopefully, we'll get some more value. With that, Beverly, can't wait to introduce you and learn what's going on. But so honored to have you back again as a co-host. Beverly, what's new?
Well, thank you, Don. First, before anything is new, for this show is always new. And what we always want is comments and comments, questions, anything that you like. And you can also post after the stream is over, because sometimes we forget what we wanted to say because we're listening and then other ideas come in our head. So if you follow the Tuesdays, well, Tuesdays, it's really about women empowerment. And I'm so happy to have Lance here. And you say, why a guy, right? Well, well, because although we think of caregivers as women, Lance will certainly give you so much value on the caregiving level, senior care and home care. And if you're following me, you know what I do. Sometimes I'm a coach, sometimes I'm a therapist, sometimes a consultant. I wear many, many hats. And in general, I help women over 50 to reach another level in their life, a life between their business and their personal life. And all those links are missing when we are taking care of others. And it could be our children, it could be other family members, but whatever it is, we are not our true selves. We are not our whole selves, because your mind isn't in it. And we need energy to perform on our best level. So we're going to be talking about all this stuff, and it's heavy stuff, seriously. But if we live long enough, someone's going to have to take care of us. And very often we are taking care of others. And so I want you to kind of consider all this, because we all live longer than we have in any other generation, which means we're going to need more caregiving. And we're going to need to be able to set things up for ourselves so that we can manage our own lives for as long as possible. So that being said, I'd like to pass it to Lance, because you should really meet this man. Lance.
Thank you, Beverly. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you and Don today. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Wonderful.
Well, Lance, now that we're right into the subject matter of caregiving, and you're the expert for sure, just for an introduction, how did you get into caregiving?
Sure. Well, it really started in my teens, late teens. I was very close with my grandparents. They lived down south, and my grandma had developed dementia unbeknownst to the family, and she started calling the local police station. And this is like a little town in the south, like a Mayberry, where everybody knows everyone. And so the police, after the second or third time, they called my uncle who lived in town and said, if your mom calls us anymore, we're going to have to start taking some action, which really meant we're going to have to take her away to get evaluated. And then, the state would get involved in things. And none of us knew. My uncle, the rest of the family never knew anything was wrong with grandma. What was going on, though, there's a thing called sundowning when you have dementia. And once the sun went down and it was late in the night, she started having hallucinations that my uncle was having these big parties in her house while she was sleeping, and she was calling the police to get these people out of her home. And there was never anybody there though. And that was really the first tip off to our family, because we would have phone calls with grandma. Everything sounded normal, very coherent, but it's kind of like, still water runs deep. Well, on the surface, she looked fine, but once you got below the surface, that's when it started becoming more pronounced. So I actually drove down, picked grandma up, and she came to live with my mom and sister and I for several years. And that was really my first experience with dementia, but also with caregiving, though the word caregiving never really came into my lexicon. And then my father, years later, came to live with my wife and I. Again, had an issue that we weren't aware of. I was actually pursuing medical school at the time, and this was 24/7 care that he needed. And one of the frustrating things for me, and I think for many family caregivers, is once they get that diagnosis or once they find out something's wrong, it's really, as a good friend of ours coined the term, it's diagnose and adios. You get that diagnosis and then it's kind of you're on your own to figure it out. And we had one of the best healthcare systems in the country, maybe even the world, coming to our house 3, 4, 5 times a week. Knew my wife and I, we were in our early 20s. We're at our wits' end. My wife is taking care of her career. I'm still pursuing mine. And we had no support, no outside support or help or resources. And so I had the genius idea of, you know what, we should start a company where we send people into the homes to help families like us. I thought I just reinvented the wheel, and we found out pretty quickly, there's an entire industry out there, which was good. But at least from my standpoint, it was also a little disappointing that these 2.5 years, no one ever suggested to us, have you looked into getting some extra care, some respite, some short-term rehab, nothing. And so we started our company about 13 years ago. And for the last 6 years, it's been the #1 rated company in Michigan, because at the core value of our company is supporting these family caregivers, whether they need to hire us professionally or not. Any ones we come into contact with, we make sure to equip them with as many resources as we can to help them on their journey.
Hey, that's fantastic, and it's kind of interesting how life has its twists and turns, and because of events you never anticipate, puts you
Right.
right into a situation you never could have planned on, but also creates these opportunities. And it's interesting when you mention sundowners is my mother was doing great on her own, but at a certain point was missing out on her pills and bills, right? And we got a call from her wonderful place that she was living and says she can't be here on her own.
Yeah.
And then she had to get a pacemaker put in. And when we brought her back to her house, and we had just bought this beautiful house with even a mother-in-law's apartment built into it, so it was perfect. She had sundowners, and I had no idea what it was. And it turned out she didn't even know who I was. And all of a sudden, we had people in the basement and people outside coming in, and,
Yeah.
and it was just really scary. Luckily, with Google and YouTube, you can get information very quickly now. And it turned out it was only temporary because of the anesthetic or whatever she had to deal with. And we just created lights all over her room. So the room was lit up like a Christmas tree. And that kind of got over it. But it was scary because it's like, how do you work within this situation? And I think ignorance is not bliss
Right.
when it comes to family members or health situations. And to your point, everybody has their own life and they're busy before something new shows up. And there's an element of guilt that comes into play too. Am I doing enough? Can I continue? And then the strain on relationships is tremendous. So, but when looking back, it was one of the best experiences I ever had. And
Right.
it's always easier looking back.
Right.
So, you bring up some quality points. And with that said, let me bring the audience in. Carrie's here, our daily jokester. I was working on a joke and I told to Mike Tyson, I want to see if I had a strong punchline. Well, that's better than usual, Carrie. It's Rose Day. Great for you. And comes back. I was in the medical field. I attempted to do that for my great aunt until I had to put her in a home. She lived till the age of 98. Well, you must have done something right, Carrie.
Yeah.
Harvey comes in. Harvey's just the greatest. He's in our cohort group every other Thursday with Beverly and 3 other people. Harvey has the franchise show that follows this show and is now launching a 2nd season of the franchise brand show on Thursday. And Harvey's just been with us from 10 months from the time he was in the audience to the time he was a guest here to the time he has his own show. So it's great to see maturity and evolution taking place. I believe this is Jason Gerardo. So thank you for being here. Dennis is here, another wonderful individual, been with us since the beginning, comes every day. He's got a HVAC business in Colorado for 49 years. Got to give him credit for stick-with-itness. Agree ignorance is not bliss. Bright light is right, for sure. So Beverly, I know you're dealing with many people, especially women over 50, and that's the reason for the Women's Empowerment Show. How are you seeing caregiving becoming a important aspect of growing older?
Well, we all grow old, right? And we're all going to need caregiving at one time. And what's also happening is as we age, whether it's a partner or a spouse, or it's not necessarily the child that's giving the caregiving. Often you're going to have, we stay in the home longer, or we try to stay in the home longer. And I'm in Canada. Healthcare is somewhat different than it is in the US. We do have services. Things are not perfect. No system is perfect. But what happens is you try to have home care as long as possible. And very often what we have are elderly people who are sick helping the elderly. And that is a problem too, because nobody likes to be helped. And if you're not feeling well, you can't give of your best self. You really can't. You can become frustrated. It's not ideal. So it's one thing to also let go and take time and have self-care for yourself too, because this is a struggle. It's not always easy. As a matter of fact, it's hard. And sometimes children are not the best advice givers. And sometimes the person that's struggling does not tell you the truth because they want to deny that these changes are happening to themselves. And it can be really a very, very frustrating and upsetting time for so many people. And this is what I see. This is when people come to me as well. It's like, how can I make this work? How can I get my mother, who isn't even in my state or province, to understand that she needs help and that she should wear her medical alert bracelet or whatever? The frustration of children is huge.
Yeah.
The frustration also of the person that's needing help is huge too, because they want to stay. And so it can be ideal if, in your case, for instance, Dawn, your mother let go and she allowed things to happen. With my in-laws, they lived into their 90s and they were both taking care of each other, and it was wonderful. In the case of my mom, and I help others. So just think about it. When you're helping others, you think you can know everything. Well, when you're in that process, you lose it too. And this is why everybody needs help, because it's one thing to separate and be the caregiver. It's another thing to be the daughter. And what I found is I had to play both roles. And it wasn't easy, because if you're struggling with dementia, people know, people understand. My mother was struggling physically, and her mind is better than mine is today.
Yeah.
And she would pass every psychiatric exam with flying colors. but she really needed care. And did she want to do it? Absolutely not. And did she know that she couldn't do it? I think deep down inside, because absolutely when I finally got her the care that she needed, there was a relief, but she was always right to the end saying, I'm going home. And this is the thing. We, on the other side, have to understand and accept that it's really, really hard for some people to let go. And sometimes, as you must know, Lance, to the end, they do not let go.
Right.
They fight, you know?
Yeah.
And so as the child, the caregiver, the loved one, you have to accept where the other person is coming from. Don't push yourself on them. It'll make it harder for you, and it'll certainly make it more of a fight on the other side. So the whole idea is to accept and get as much knowledge as you possibly can about really human beings and allow ourselves to understand that this is a process. Just as we have life, we have death, and we should be talking about this experience openly and not just fight it and pretend it doesn't exist.
Right.
So, that being said, Lance, I'm so happy that your services are there, and people should not be embarrassed to reach out and get help and to
Right.
understand that today everything is open with the internet. Everything is open, and to ask caregivers, ask other people online. There is support on Facebook, on LinkedIn, everywhere. So understand you're not alone, and I think that that's a key.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, so Lance, with all your experience and with the growing interest in this field, where do you see the opportunity to continue to bring more value going forward?
Well, I think there's two things I want to kind of touch on here, Don, based on what Beverly had said. And, I loved hearing Beverly say, that self-care, you have to put that at the top, whether it's an adult child helping a parent or it's a spouse helping an ill spouse. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your loved one. I think that's first and foremost. And, Beverly, you may agree with this. They often feel like they're being selfish or greedy, or, they feel guilty even because I'm going to go to the gym or I'm going to go do my annual exam with my doctor. But if I do that, then I'm leaving mom or dad alone. And that's not the case. Don't release yourself from that guilt, because you have to be at your best so that you can give your best. But the other side of that is we usually see two different issues, Don. And that's either adult children are living blissfully ignorant, where in that case, ignorance isn't bliss because they don't recognize that mom is really not of sound mind or physically able to continue maintaining her ADLs, her activities of daily living, but they don't want to get her the help. The other side of that coin is the kids want the help, but mom doesn't want the help because she's saying there's nothing wrong with her. And I think a lot of that goes back to, when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you've been independent for a long time. And I think certain generations, especially like our 80s and our 90-year-olds, when they were children and they saw grandma get put into a home, it was not a pleasant place. And it's not like what we've kind of evolved to in the, at least here in America for our long-term care health. They have nice facilities that can support you, but that's not always the answer either. Then you can look at home care, because maybe they don't need 24/7, residency. Maybe they just need help on Monday, Wednesday, Friday because their daughter or grandchildren are helping on Tuesday and Thursday, and they're able to continue living in that familiar environment, especially when you're dealing with dementia. A person with dementia, without going too far down that rabbit hole, they don't have the ability to take something they just learned of today or tomorrow and let that get into the long-term portion of their memory of their brain. So every day they're going to feel scared. They're going to be unaware. They're going to feel like this is an unfamiliar environment, and it's raising their anxiety. It's raising their cortisol and their stress levels, and it's causing blood pressure issues or just behavior issues because they're terrified. they're waking up every day in a new place, seeing countless new faces. But if you provided that care for them in their home, they know they're in their home because that's in the long-term portion of their brain. So they don't feel as scared or terrified, but it's still a huge adjustment for any of us. You know, if I went home today and there's a strange person there helping to take care of my wife, I'm going to wonder who this person is and what are you doing in my house, you know, because that's kind of our private sanctuary for any of us. But it's the best alternative out of the alternatives for having help and support when able to have it in your home privately, because you pick the days and you can pick the hours. And the one thing I personally love the most about home care versus like the long-term care facilities, and there's a place and a role for all of these options, right? But unless you need a RN supervision around the clock, like in my father's situation, 2.5 years, his illness and disease, he had osteomyelitis, which, you know, for those that aren't familiar, it's infection of the bone. We had 7 major surgeries where they ended up cutting off a good portion of his tailbone to try to kill off the infection from spreading further. Unfortunately, it was not successful. Otherwise, we would have kept him in the home until his passing, but we had to put him in a facility because we can't give him IV antibiotics around the clock in our home setting and hire a private registered nurse. So we didn't have an option in that scenario. But unless you need those types of interventions, stay in your home or keep your loved one in their home for as long as possible. One, it will hopefully protect your assets longer. But two, they're going to thrive. It may not look like thriving to you and I, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to how they would thrive or lack thereof in a facility, they're going to thrive for a lot longer and further in their home because the care is going to be specifically just for them. It's not 1 or 2 aides taking care of a whole wing of a facility where they have tasks and, you know, to-dos that they have to get checked off their list, or else they're not going to, you know, have a job. So they don't get to spend that quality time with that person. And, you know, how's your day going? Why are you sad? How can I cheer you up? Or maybe they have something exciting. They just learned about the grandchildren. They, you know, in your home, they can sit and they can talk about that, reminisce and bond over those things. It's not just about completing a task or a chore with home care. It's also about supporting that person emotionally, physically. And, you know, the health stuff is important, but it all works together.
Yeah, you make so many important points, and points that whether you're directly affected or indirectly, everybody has an impact,
Yeah.
right? And what we found is that primarily you need to have an advocate.
Yeah.
Right? You need someone talking to people for you, checking things out, being there, because if you're not 100%, you're not in a position to comprehend, to make decisions, and you can get lost in the shuffle. The other thing is you need to have a pretty good understanding of the commitment. If my wife wasn't as wonderful as she was or is, we could have never done it, because she took the days and I took the nights, because she was able to be home. And what was fascinating, to your point, is when we brought her into our house, that same week we had our first granddaughter, which meant my mother had her first great granddaughter. And when we brought her in, she had been in hospitals, and at a certain age, medical intervention is not
Right.
the best thing. And I thought, well, better to be with us. And I never knew it would go on for 2 years. But when Claire was born, she would come over every Wednesday and my wife would take care of her, and that would be Claire Day. And for the other 6 days, my mother would always say, well, when's Claire Day coming? Right? And when it came, she had that whole day with her, and a newborn baby and someone who's just coming into the world and an elderly person who's leaving the world. They were a great match.
Yeah.
Because newborns don't know an older person or what it is. And I think having a reason to live,
Right.
you know, having something to look forward to. And I know as you get older, you become less relevant. You know, eventually you give up the keys to your car. Eventually you're limiting freedom. But, you know, having a healthy perspective. And just a few years before, me and my wife were fortunate to stay at a lot of Four Seasons hotels. So I decided, hey, I'm going to learn how to be the best Four Season service provider. And every night I'd go into my mother's room and I'd say, is there anything we can do to make your stay a little better? And we had a whole routine that 6 o'clock was meds, 8 o'clock was insulin, 10 o'clock was oxygen. And I'd come in every 2 hours. And she ran the game show network 24/7, full blast on her TV, which luckily we had some French doors and it limited that, but you just accept certain things. And I know there's times when you can't travel anymore, right? You can run out for an hour for a dinner and come back real quick, but you can't travel, you can't socialize as much, and it limits your ability. And you're right, there's times I said, what if I go before she does? Because with all of the stress and strain, and I always said you got to protect yourself. You're not going to be good to anybody if you're not healthy yourself. And it reflects on the person you're serving, right? If you're frustrated, if you're angry, if you feel like you're losing something, it's going to have an impact on everybody, but it also gives you some insight. And what I also learned, it's just as important to help somebody out of this world as it is to bring somebody into this world.
Absolutely.
And if you have that opportunity, and let's go really quick to Harvey, because Harvey has a long comment here that's valuable. Our neighbor is 96 years old, still living independently, and we all look out for her. I watched an interesting probably program about blue zones. I saw that also.
I did too.
Where people live over 100 years. Two of the factors that contribute to this great age were a definite purpose and to be valued, surrounded by people who learn from the experience. And there are a lot of societies who still value older people, who revere them and make them the highlight of the household. And then Dennis comes back with agree, home sweet home is still true. People have so little at the end that when you take dignity away, and you take pride away, that people then start to think, hey, I'm just an intrusion on these people's lives, and now they feel guilty, and now you're guilty, they're guilty. Guilty is not a good place. Dennis comes back with agree, working together still works, helping us continue more happily. It sounds like it was more clear when Claire Day came. It definitely was. And, you do bring in the whole family. And we actually had a companion come in when my wife had to go away for 3-4 hours. So there was a lady that would come in, didn't do anything except really be a great friend. Right? I mean, they talk and they laugh and they keep my mother occupied. And I think that, having other family members, like every Sunday was family dinner. And everybody would show up and my mother would see them. And I think, those are the things that really last in your memory. You forget about the inconvenience and the situations where they're not that good. But I think to Lance's point, my mother was very good with doing things on her own. So she didn't need help to do anything. She just needed someone there in case.
Right.
And then you get really good because in the beginning I got a beeper and all of a sudden the first time it went off, I thought it was like 9/11 and it turned out she needed a toothpick and then eventually I got everything set, plenty of toothpicks, plenty of cold water, plenty of Kleenex, what else is there? And you just get smarter and better for the experience. So Beverly, we all have had experience, Lance definitely more than us individually. But it also gives you a look into the future, saying one day that is going to be me at what age, in what situation. And one thing I told the kids, I said, you see how I'm taking care of my mother? This is how you're going to have to take care of me and your mother. So take some notes here. And I think that models well for everybody. And I think getting as many people involved makes so much more sense because it lightens the load and you can take an afternoon off if you really need it. So Beverly, this is a fascinating conversation today.
It is. It's a fabulous conversation, and we all can give thought to it because we're all going to be in it in one time or another. And I think also to your point, Lance, to try to stay in an environment that you're familiar with as long as possible is really the key.
Right.
However, what I also see is, first of all, Dawn, your mom and your whole family is extremely lucky to have had such a perfectly good and healthy time at that end of life experience. Not everybody goes through that. And
Right.
there are many people that are alone. Their children are all over the place. And there are many children that are extremely stressed out because they know that mom is not doing well. And there may be one caregiver in the family that's closer and has to take perhaps a plane once every few weeks. This can become very taxing both emotionally and financially on different families, and it can be extremely stressful. And these are the people I see when you're talking about caregiving. It's not so much the caregiving. They're going to get people to come in to their loved one's house. However, the loved one also has to be compliant in opening the door to those people. So this is not an easy, by all means, easy time for anybody. There are also siblings in the family that don't get along with others, or some that say, you have more money, so you should be paying more. And they say, well, I put in more time. The fights can be enormous, and the emotional stress can be huge as well. So
So,
we always have to take a look because we look at the ideal, you know, everyone should be happy and working together and let's have a wonderful end of life experience. Well, there are a lot of emotions that come in to end of life and all parts of life, but end of life can be particularly difficult.
right.
You can find some very greedy siblings and grandchildren and all kinds of things that go on at an end of life. And so we have to be open and understand as well. And if you're going through any of this, I really suggest that you do get help because the taxing emotion that it takes on you, the lack of sleep and all the pressures that you may have, um, this can really be stressful. And I'm thinking of particular clients that when it was both her mom and her aunt, and she was going from both houses, bringing food, making sure caregivers were doing the right thing, et cetera, et cetera. The stress was so bad that what she found solaces was going into the casino.
Mm,
And that was also a place where nobody knew what she was doing, but she could release some kind of just the stress that she had and escape.
yeah.
For a woman to go into the bar, kind of unacceptable. To drink alone, I don't think so, because then you can see the difference. But the casino was just a place where she could get lost. And women go and find those secluded places that may not be healthy. They can go to have affairs. And I'm just saying this because I see this. And what it is do they really mean that? No, they don't. What it is the pressure is too much. But on the outside, they'll talk to their friends. They'll say, it's fine, I'm taking care of my mother. And then they can also say, oh, my mother is so difficult. But at the end of the day, everybody is going to commiserate, but you're left with those feelings. So please, if this is your situation and it's not that ideal situation of this happy family model, most of us don't fit that model. And we have to see that. It's not always a good time or a happy time, but you have to make it work as best you can for yourself and for your individual family. And self care is a must, and get the emotional help that you need because you can be giving and doing the best that you can, but you still need help. You still need that break. And you also need to be able to talk and let go all the emotional stuff that's going on with you as well.
Right.
So
that's
comfort yourself
such a
as well.
valuable share because we're dealing with people dealing with people.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just stuff or things or how to make more money on your stock portfolio, and it's personal, right? It's your mother, it's somebody who you grew up with. And, you know, the funny thing, when she first came to live with us, I told her, here's how I think it should work is ask me for anything. And the first time I'll tell you exactly how I feel. Ask me again and the answer is yes, right? Because you're my mom and whatever you want is what I want to provide for you. But I want you at least to have some information, some options, and at least know how I feel. Ultimately, it's whatever you want is what you're going to get. And I think that's so important. And I think the challenge too was to Lance's point, me and my wife are not medically equipped to do anything beyond supporting someone. So you always worry: is this the night there's going to be an event? Is there what's going to happen? And the last thing before I'll turn over to Lance is I'd have all my friends feeling sorry for us. Well, it must be really difficult. Must be very hard. You're missing out on this and missing out. I said, well, listen, here's the way I look at it. If you only had one more day with someone who is so important to you, wouldn't you be excited by that? Well, I've got
Right.
that day. And the other thing is, depends who your mother is.
Yeah.
You got a great mother and you love being with her and having conversations. Why wouldn't you want that? So everything is individual. I think to Beverly's point, all you can do is all you can do. And if you're doing your best, you shouldn't feel guilty. And everybody knows your intent. So, Lance, with all your support and valuable resources, how do you guide people through this journey that may be something you're experienced at, but very new to them?
Yeah, well, I want to unpack some of the things that you guys said, and I think they're all really outstanding points. One, you're talking about friends, and the friends not really getting it. Beverly, you talked about some women, man, I'm sure do it also, finding that place to go for that solace and just to escape. And I think some of that escape is also due to the situation they're in, but also because they're not getting the social support from maybe their family or friends either. And to Don's point, like you were saying, your friends were questioning you. You know, I always recommend that people look into a support group. A caregiver support group is a tremendous resource. They don't cost anything. Well, let me preface that they shouldn't cost anything. You can do them virtually or in person. Prior to COVID, our company ran 6 different caregiver support groups throughout Michigan. And what it is, it's a place for all these unique caregivers for their unique situations to come to one place where they can find others and they have that commonality where these people are going through what they're going through and they can relate to it. I think sometimes, and Beverly would probably be better to speak to that. I feel like sometimes people are just wanting somebody to understand,
Mhm.
right? And a friend, as well intentioned as they are, they may not necessarily understand because they haven't gone through it yet. And that brings me to a lady we had at one of our support groups prior to COVID. She was new, brand new to it, heard about it through the local newspaper, did a whole story on it. And she came in first month, she just sat and listened, which is fine. Second month she came in and she came in literally crying. And so I just asked, do you mind me asking what's wrong? And she says, my best friend wants nothing to do with me anymore. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I go, do you mind me asking what happened? She says, we used to go out, our husbands and I and us, we would go out every Friday or Saturday, every week since like high school. They were high school sweethearts to dinner and a movie or a concert or, just some, social activity. The last 6 months, I've had to tell them no. Her friend finally got upset with her and said, well, are you not friends with me anymore? Are you too good to come out with us? And she says, no, this is what's going on. I'm trying to explain, and I've tried to explain to you, my husband is dealing with early onset dementia. He's not using the bathroom correctly. He's incontinent. He has no filter, and he doesn't drive well in a car. I can't have him as a passenger. I'm afraid he's going to open the door or grab the steering wheel or something. And I told her, I said, I'm not going to excuse your friend, but just to maybe help you feel a little bit better, don't be too hard on her because her and her husband aren't dealing with anything remotely close to what you're having to go through right now. And hopefully she never will. But it's really hard to get somebody to understand what you're going through who's never gone through it themselves. You know, I don't know what it's like to deliver a baby. You can tell me all about it, but I'll never know what that's like. You know, only a woman could understand that who's had children. That's kind of the same thing with being a caregiver. You know, Don, if you were never a caregiver for your mom, Beverly and I could tell you all about it, but you wouldn't really understand it until you had to experience it. And that's what these families are going through. And that's why it's hard for them to, you know, talk to their friends or have that relationship. You know, friends can be good listeners, but sometimes you want somebody to say, I know what you're going through. That I think has a lot of value, and a support group gives you that value. You can do them virtually, you can do them in your local communities. Just go and listen, see if it's something that works for you. But that's a good place for you to substitute the bar or the casino or having an affair, because all these people in this room can at least relate to you at some level at what you're going through. And the whole concept is not only to get, like with ours, we'd give them resources and tips and, you know, different, you know, things to help them. But outside of that group, until you meet the next month, yeah, you could call us and ask us a question. We were fine with that. But all these other people that are in there, you might want to call them at 9 o'clock at night and say, you will not believe what my day was like or what I'm going through right now. That's going to give you a lot of benefit too, and you're going to feel heard, but you're also going to be have a feeling of being understood, which I think is really valuable. Um, Something else I want to just touch on, Don, was, you know, sit down and talk with your loved ones before the crisis occurs or before the need for care occurs. Find out what their wishes are. You know, mom, dad, husband, wife, whoever it may be to you. You know, what do you think about this? You know, just if you don't want to have a direct conversation, bring it up casually. Say, yeah, you know, my wife and I, we were just talking about, you know, when we get older, we're thinking about this is what we want or don't want. What did you want, mom? You know, just that might be a good opening to start that dialogue, because that also will help prevent some of the crisis down the road to try to, you know, one, hopefully they'll appoint one or two of the children to be advocates or power of attorneys for them. But also, when you have to make some tough decisions and you're the one making those decisions because you're the one that's the power of attorney, you can't have a sibling come in and say, why are you doing that to mom? You know, that's not what she wanted. Well, no, this is what mom wanted. That's why I'm doing this. So that helps to kind of curb some of the hostility or conflict, because you're only executing what your mom or dad or your spouse's wishes were. You're not making the decision for them. You're just acting on their behalf. And it could be a very casual conversation, very non-threatening. It's not always a conversation we want to have, but, you know, none of us knows what tomorrow will hold. And it's just about making sure that our wishes are respected or our loved ones' wishes are respected.
That's so beautiful, because in one way you lose what you had, let's say your social circle. By bringing in a support group, now you engage another social group or support group that, you know, makes you not feel alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest thing, is if you're suffering through something and you have no help and everybody is not excited or interested in you as much because it may take an accommodation on their part, you know, you feel kind of lost also, and you never know how much time you're dealing with.
Right. And if I could add to that real quick, Don, you know, it also allows you to have a social life. And I mean by the sense, I've known over the years countless couples that, you know, maybe it was a husband taking care of a wife or a wife, a husband, they would pair up with some friends in that support group. They would all go out to a movie or dinner or ice cream or to the park, because they're all dealing with, so they don't feel kind of singled out, and everybody is dealing with similar situations. So it's very acceptable.
Yeah, and I think knowing that, you know, other people are going through this, and a lot of it is your perspective and your mindset. I know my sister and my brother-in-law had a young man, son, who had a very aggressive form of MS. And as soon as he was diagnosed with it, they took on the world's coming to an end. This is the worst thing in the world. And it projected, I'm sure, on my nephew. And they wouldn't allow him to be considered what he really was, you know, wouldn't allow him to be with other people like himself or do anything like this. And you could just see the whole family falling apart. You see everybody's health going down, and they're fighting against the wind in a way, and it's so sad. And it's hard for you to tell anybody something that you're not involved directly in,
Right.
because then you get, well, it's not your situation. You know what I mean? What do you have to say? So it really does put challenges in front of people. So Lance, I know you wrote a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to introduce it. Well, Beverly's even better than that. She's going to introduce it for you. So tell us a little bit about the book, the title, and what's in it, and how people can benefit from it.
Well, so I wrote this book really more for myself than anything. There wasn't like a sales purpose driven behind it. It was written because, as I shared earlier in the program, Don, when I'll say I was taking care of my father, no resources were given to me. My friends who are pursuing medical school, also professors, kind of like the situation with the support group, nobody had gone through that yet, and I'm in my early 20s going through it. And I wanted resources, I wanted guidance, and medical school is clinical, it's biology, it's sciences, it's not caregiving, it's not how do you get your father into the shower without falling. It's none of that. And nobody ever offered me any of that either, and that's okay. I mean, they were in their lane and doing their job, but I wanted to write a book that I wish I had when I was taking care of my father. So the name of the book is The All Home Care Matters Official Family Caregivers Guide. And thank you, Beverly. And what it is, it's really a roadmap. Somebody asked me, well, my niece is taking care of her mom, but she's been doing it for 3-4 years, so it's probably not a good book for her. I said, well, absolutely, it's a good book for her, because it's like a map. If I was coming to see Beverly in Canada, I need that map when I pull out of my driveway and start out to her house. But let's say I'm halfway to her house. That doesn't mean I don't need the map anymore. You still need the map until you get there. So the book's full of resources. It talks about, what is a durable medical power of attorney, what's advanced directives. It gives you like one section is all about resources, checklist of, the important documents you want to know where they're at for when the time comes you may need them. But it also talks about, taking care of yourself, when and how to identify if your loved one starts needing care or you suspect they need care, what to do. It's from the very beginning all the way to the very end.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Beverly, I know you are trained in working with people who are dealing with life situations, and maybe some that they can't really grasp or take advantage of in the best way possible. So
Well,
how do you find yourself in these situations?
well, what happens also? I'm just kind of, well, I find myself in situations because people come to me for that, but what you're saying, Lance, is we all need this information, and this is
Right.
why I bought the book and I gave a testimonial on the book, because we need these resources, and the more resources that are out there, the better. But what I'm telling my clients always, always, is we have to evolve, and we cannot and should not fight it. And evolution starts with spring cleaning. We change, and we don't have to hold on so tightly with all our, not only our possessions, but our precious lives as we were, to evolve and be who we are and live in the present. And when I was doing my clinical work, and I had to do internship, and I was in gerontology, I had an internship stint there, and I was saying, oh my goodness, I don't really want this one. And I loved it. I never realized how, instead of living in the future like we all do, everyone that was there was living in the present. And I'm sure you see that, Lance, a lot.
Yeah.
You know, every day is a day.
Yeah.
And waking up the next day is another day. And that for me was so moving and so impressive. And that's what I hold on to. And I like to share that with my clients too, that one day at a time. And when you're a caregiver, you're thinking of the forever and the never and the end of the road. You're thinking of all the paperwork and all that, which is there.
Mm.
However, that one day at a time will get you through everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that that is so important, and not to hold on, and starting with that. There's I think it's a German word or a Swedish word, it's called like death cleaning. Okay. Cleaning up your house as if you were ready to die. Well, what it is it's a cleansing, that I'm at this place. I'm not there. Yes, don't have to get rid of every single memory, but what we're doing is we're just transferring and evolving and changing. And I think that that is so important. It's not, we don't throw away the old, but what we're doing is we're just changing and moving on and evolving. And this is what it's all about. And there is a book, I have to get it, but it's a must get. It's called I'm Dead, Now What? Okay. And what it is all the stuff you have to do that you will leave to other people. And apparently it's I think everyone should get it. I didn't get it yet, but what it is all the passwords that only our generation has, right?
Yeah.
All the bank problems, all that stuff. It's not simple. And anybody that follows is going to be left with that. So it's today that we should work on tomorrow. It's the evolution. It's the changes. It's not holding on and resisting. And I think when we do that, when we are caregivers, and that could be professional caregivers also, there is burnout among professional caregivers. It is hard, as well as family members, because they're dealing with family members as well. So we all have to take care of ourselves. As Lance was saying, we all have to get the information that we need to move forward, to be our best selves. We cannot lose who we are in the process. But the only way to do it is to evolve into the change. And whether we like it or not, there is change. That's the only constant. So you have to make it as pleasurable as possible, even in the very, very, very unpleasant situations.
Absolutely.
That's what I see.
Well, those are wonderful thoughts and insights. Hopefully people take some notes today and take it to heart. And the other thing I learned, to Beverly's point, is you may be looking at the next 20, 30 years, but the person you're dealing with or working with is one day at a time, and how to make those days special. I remember every night, because I had these strategies and routines, and I would come in and it would be dessert time. And every night my mother would say, "What's for dessert?" And I'd say, "I have drumsticks, I have fudgicles, I have this, I have this." And she would always say, "Is that all you have?" And I would say, "Yes." And she said, "Well, that's all you have, that's what I'm going to have." And it was kind of a routine that we'd have. Or I'd go somewhere, I knew she liked strudel. So I'd find a great place and I'd pick up 2, 3 different types of strudel or some kinds of foods that she was really into, because I think taste buds still live for quite a long time. And that's something that people can get simple pleasure out of and have something to look forward to, right? Well, I'm going to be eating this, or people are going to come over. And you give somebody something to focus on, like Saturday, the kids are going to come over, we're going to have a barbecue or whatever, and put yourself in their shoes. But also know every night when I said good night, that could be the last night.
Right.
That's right.
Right. And I would always end with a joke, and typically it was the same joke. And I would always say, "I want to leave you laughing and see you with a smile on your face." And then I'd wake up in the morning hoping when I opened up those French doors, she'd be there. But I think you have to put yourself in a position that you have to give yourself enough room, enough grace, and say, "I know my mother wouldn't want me to get sick over it." The other big element is we're talking, but who has the resources? You bring a new person in your house and all of a sudden you're buying this, you're providing for this, and you're doing all this. Well, if you're already under the gun and a tight budget and no resources, that's only going to create more friction with you and your spouse or you and your family, or you have to make tough decisions. So that's why living it day by day is the only way you can live too, because you can get so overwhelmed
That's right.
to say, hey, if this goes on for 6 months, I'm going to be broke, or I'm going to have to not be able to provide what I'm providing. So it's all those elements that by not living in a vacuum and having a support group, having a therapist like Beverly, or a counselor, or a coach, or just a good friend, or leveraging free resources, like Lance says. People have churches, people have different organizations that specialize in this. And when you feel like, hey, I'm not alone, but here's one last thing I'll say before turning it back to Lance, is you really appreciate other people's situations when you understand them.
Yeah.
So when you see a fellow caregiver, you know what they're dealing with, and you're not the person to say, well, we're not going out with you anymore. You're probably the person to say, is there something I can do to give you an afternoon off, right? Because 4 hours that we were spending going out to dinner and a movie, I'll come over for a Saturday afternoon, and especially if you like the person, know the person, you're a relief valve, right? And I think plus the person you're working with has variety. They want to know their value. They want to know they're still honored and respected, because people still have pride and they have embarrassment when they can't do what they used to do easily. So I think there's so much to it. And like Beverly mentioned earlier, everybody's getting older, living longer. Things that you never had to deal with as much is now starting to be expected. And I think books like Lance has, and I'm sure there's people in the audience, not only here today, but here in the future when this video continues to play, who can find some solace, some relief, and not the guilt. Because the last thing you want to do is, geez, I walked out of the house for 10 minutes and someone fell, right? And now it was because of me. And now you got guilt on guilt. So Lance, we're kind of closing out the hour.
Yeah.
It seems like when we do this, an hour flips like 30 minutes. What's your takeaway from our conversation and show today, and any last tips you can provide?
Well, the last tips I always like to leave for families is you're not alone, and I think, being a caregiver, for us, we see it so often. They feel like they are the only ones in the world, not in a selfish way, but they just feel isolated because so many in their social circles haven't experienced or are not going through what they're going through. So I always like to just reinforce you're not alone. But also, one of the common themes today has been, taking care of yourself. Make sure you practice self-care and take time for yourself, albeit, just going out on porch and reading or having a coffee in the morning by yourself, undisturbed. And, just find that support. It's in your area, it's in your community, and just lean on that support, and when you feel like you need extra help or more help, definitely seek out counseling. People like Beverly would be a great asset to you, because one of the other things is we say take it day by day. Sometimes it might be only a couple of weeks, maybe you're having to take care of that person, but it could also be several years, and if you don't practice these things from the beginning, it becomes a slippery slope.
Yeah, and I want to recognize Lance for all he's done, along with his wife, to bring so much value and knowledge and in direct benefit to so many people. And I think that's something that people should take some pride in. Before I swing it over to Beverly, just want to recognize some more comments. Harvey says looking after one another should be a subject at school. I have to go now and prep for my show, but thanks for today. Thank you always, Harvey. Dennis says, I'm with you there. Thanks for your helpful help. Omar's here, who does a Zoom party show. Great guy, always a big supporter of the show. Going to have him back. Good day. Thank you. Dennis comes back with agree living alone is not a helpful zone. And Carrie says, hello, Harvey. And the last comment is thanks for sharing caring with wisdom about self-care and others. And this is what makes this show so important, is the people who are with us. I mean, and support it and learn from it. But also, everybody here has their own social network, has their own influence. So this show doesn't just stop with the person, it can continue and expand. And that's so important. So, Beverly, thank you so much for introducing Lance to us. And I think he's one of the most incredible guests we've had for a first time. So, what are your final thoughts and takeaways?
Well, my final thoughts, first of all, was wonderful having you, Lance. And
Thank you, Beverly.
it's a wealth of experience. And we should always reach out, okay, to people who can help us. And I think that that should be the key. That should be a tip for all of us. We are not alone in this world. Lance said that. I say that. Dawn, for sure. That's what the show is all about. It's community. And when you think you are alone, you feel worse than ever. But as soon as you just start talking, you start feeling good. And people tell me that all the time after they've made that first call. Okay. And so, yes, I encourage that. I help women, primarily women, who reach out, but there are men too with private custom coaching solutions to move your life to the next level. But I want you to say, you're the one that has to say, I want to be able to talk about this. Yeah. I have this, and it's not a secret anymore. I can share it. And when you're sharing it to your friends, when you share it to someone such as myself, what you are doing is not only helping yourself, but other people learn too. I learn from you as much as you learn from me, really. And that's the truth. And what I want you to also do is not feel guilty if you have these feelings of negativity towards your loved ones sometimes. And then you say, I shouldn't feel like that. But that's a key. It's a note to self saying, maybe I need a break. Maybe I just need to clear my head. And don't say, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the space. Just walk out. Just go to the next room. Just read a book, listen to music. So those are my tips, right? From just small little baby tips. If you're going through anything like that, find some space for yourself. It doesn't have to be much, but it starts with a something. Okay, I hope to see you next Tuesday.
Well, for sure. The last thing I'll say is hope springs eternal. And when you have something that's hopeful, something you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, know that nothing is going to last forever, and, I think that keeps people going that extra day. And don't bite off more than you can chew, and be as authentic and honest as you can to say, I can't do anymore. And if you reach that point, then you shouldn't do any more until you can catch your breath or get some more support. But I think taking all the responsibility and accountability is too much for anybody, and it's unnecessary. Sometimes you got to forget about your own pride and ask for help when you've been independent and self-sufficient for so long. So with that said, thank you, Lance. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you, audience. Come back in 23 hours, and we've got Jason Gerardo and Dave Snell, who are military guys who are helping individuals transition from military to civilian life and are focused on mental health. So be a great show. And then Thursday, me and Kelly and possibly Charles Caldwell, who's now in Toronto for the week, who runs the largest English-speaking school in Hong Kong. And just fascinating. So can't thank you enough, so we'll have to do it again.